The sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the weathered barn. The air was thick with the scent of hay and the distant sound of crickets serenading the twilight. Beneath the shelter of the barn's wooden beams, a quiet ritual unfolded night after night. A young woman, Sarah, would slip into the hayloft, breathing in the comforting must of straw and the lingering warmth of the day. She'd curl up in the soft embrace of hay, the world outside fading into a gentle hush. To the townsfolk, it was just another quirk in a small town, a tale they'd chuckle about over coffee. But for the barn's owner, Old Man Thompson, it was a mystery that gnawed at him. After months of seeing her silhouette framed against the fading light, he couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was hidden in those nightly visits. His curiosity was masked by his own weariness drifted by decades of loneliness. The silence in an empty house was often louder than the clamor of farm life. One crisp autumn evening, as the leaves swirled to the ground like confetti, Old Man Thompson resolved to finally confront her. He'd seen Sarah begin her nightly pilgrimage to the hayloft, her steps both hesitant and determined. He approached, his footsteps crunching the gravel beneath him. With each step, the fading sunlight painted him a shadow, a reluctant figure of authority standing before a sleepy sanctuary. His voice cracked the evening peace, deep and gravelly like the earth itself. Startled, Sarah sat up, strands of hair falling across her face. The barn's dim light hesitated between them, a frame charged with tension and unspoken words. I like it here," she stammered, the softness in her voice like the whisper of the wind passing through the grass. But Old Man Thompson wasn't satisfied with that answer. There was something more powerful than mere likes and dislikes swirling around. He took a step closer, curiosity pushing past his hesitation. "You can't keep sleeping up here without a reason." She looked away, her eyes clouded. The truth gnawed at her. Each word she didn't say felt like a weight pressing down on her chest. Her mind flashed back to that late spring evening, nearly 6 months prior. The night when everything changed. It was a night like any other, the cool air wrapping around her like a cloak. After a long day, Sarah had come home to find her mother in the kitchen, biting her lip as she stirred a pot of something boiling over. Shadows of tension tangled their lives as financial woes clouded their future. "Sarah, honey, we need to talk," her mother said. The way she drew in her breath spoke of fear. Her father had lost his job last month. The bills were piling up, and hope seemed like a distant dream. That evening morphed into one of hushed voices and muffled cries, the kind of pain that nearly broke the walls of their small home. As the darkness fell, Sarah took comfort in the barn. Its sturdy walls felt more like home than the rickety structure her family resided in. The haylot became her sanctuary, a fortress sheltering her from the storm brewing outside. Night after night, she sought solace in the soft whispers of the barn's wooden beams, the horses outside, and the gentle rustle of hay. Old Man Thompson watched her demeanor change as he pressed for the truth, longing to pry the distress from her guarded heart. "Why do you really come up here?" A flicker of emotion sparked in her eyes, pain bubbling to the surface. "I come here to escape, to think I can't breathe in my own house." The floodgates opened and she spilled out her heart, the struggles, the fears, the weight pressing down until it felt like she was drowning. "I'm just 18. I'm terrified I'll lose everything. My parents are fighting every day, each argument stabbing deeper and deeper." Her confession hung heavy in the air, raw, honest. Old Man Thompson's expression softened. In the middle of rural life, where silence often ruled, he'd forgotten what it felt like to share pain. He sighed deeply, recalling joys and losses etched in his own heart, years of watching his wife wither away, days of silence that had pulled his spirit under. Suddenly, Sarah's sorrow became a reflection of his own abridging of 2 lives, both isolated but craving connection. He asked with a gentleness that made her look up, meeting his eyes for the first time. "Because who would understand? I'm just the girl who sleeps in the hayloft." "No one cares," she said, almost choked on the words. "Everyone has a story, Sarah. You never know who's waiting to help." The barn was no longer just a sanctuary, but a nexus of stories, the blues of the past meeting the hopes of the future. There, beneath the rustic roof and the shimmering stars peeking through the slat-covered windows, she found an unexpected piece of comfort. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between Sarah and Old Man Thompson grew. He began opening up about his life, the love he lost and the shadows he'd faced. The nights in the hayloft transformed from mere escapes to moments of shared understanding, laughter echoing between the timber beams. She learned to bring warmth back to his stoic face, while he nurtured her aching heart, guiding her to find strength. People in town started to notice the change in Sarah. She began to carry herself with an air of determination, confidence shining where uncertainty once hid. Old Man Thompson taught her how to mend fences and care for the animals. He showed her that hard work could cultivate resilience, that pain could be transformed into purpose. Their unlikely friendship turned into a shared adventure. They organized community events to raise money for families like hers, those grappling with struggle amid economic hardship. They worked together, securing donations, gathering people, all the while breathing life back into the small town. But even as they built bridges between neighbors, nagging doubts still crept into Sarah's heart. Would it really be enough? After all the struggle, after all the work, was there hope for her family? One evening, as the sunset painted the sky a brilliant orange, she returned to the barn after another day's hard work. The barn doors creaked open, and the comforting smell of fresh hay enveloped her. But tonight, the air felt heavier. The news was coming in batches, from concerned neighbors who shared the weight of struggle around the dinner table. That night, as they sat together in the hayloft, Old Man Thompson sensed her unease. Taking a deep breath, she finally voiced the worry that had festered. "What if it's not enough, old man?" He smiled softly, understanding the depths of her fear. "You're not alone in this fight. Life will throw hurdles at you, but it's in how you respond that defines your journey. Look at this barn. It has weathered storms that brought it to its knees. Yet here it stands, not just surviving, but still resonating with history." In that moment, with the golden light spilling over them, something shifted in her. Hope began to sprout amid the shadows. The weeks rolled on, each day forging new bonds in their community. Sarah's family became an integral part of this fabric, and as they joined in the work, she could see the flickering of hope in their eyes, a softening of their hardened edges, smiles breaking over worn faces. Yet a shadow still loomed. The financial strain was still a clawing discomfort at their sides. One evening, the swirling darkness overhead seemed almost tangible. The conversation at home shifted again, discussions of things she wished to avoid. Old Man Thompson noticed the flicker of despair return to her eyes and took her aside, away from the worried voices. "You know," he began, his voice steady, "the world might seem bleak right now, but I've lived enough years to know that light can break through even the thickest clouds." With those words, she realized that each struggle was not merely an obstacle, but a step toward becoming who she was meant to be. Her resolve grew as they gathered the community together, forming partnerships, sharing burdens, and redefining what strength truly meant. Finally, as winter settled in, cloaking the town in a blanket of white, a profound transformation unfolded within Sarah. She had stopped merely surviving. The consistent late-night lows now blended into early morning optimism. The barn, once a refuge from reality, had become a place of creativity and collaboration. On a chilly evening beneath a sea of glittering stars, they gathered in the hayloft with laughter filling the air, voices rising along with their hopes. The townsfolk no longer regarded her just as the girl who slept in the hayloft. She was becoming a leader, a voice for the voiceless. So often, the magic of connection threads through shared stories like a promise of hope. And in that moment, as they huddled in the warmth of dreams, Sarah finally understood. The hayloft had become more than a refuge. It had transformed into a beacon, lighting the way for others while freeing her heart to soar. With Old Man Thompson by her side, she was ready to face their next chapter, armed not just with hope, but with the power of community, an unstoppable force against the storms that life threw her way. In the end, it wasn't just the hayloft that had changed. It was her, transformed from a girl haunted by fear into a young woman who learned that life could be woven into something beautiful, even from the most unlikely of beginnings. The evening sky was streaked with deep purples and fiery oranges as the last rays of sunlight bathed the tall barn in a warm glow. Inside, a quiet ritual took shape, unnoticed by the world outside. A young woman named Clara clambered up the wooden ladder to the hayloft, settling into a nest of golden straw. Every night it was the same. The quiet crunch of hay under her weight felt like home, wrapping around her like a soft blanket. But not tonight. As Clara curled up, a familiar shadow blocked the doorway. It was Jim, the owner of the barn. He was a sturdy man in his 50s, with creased skin that told stories of hard work and a brusque exterior that hid a caring heart. Most nights he respected her solitude, but tonight something compelled him to speak. "Clara," he called, his voice heavy with curiosity. She hesitated, the comfort of the hay momentarily replaced by a knot in her stomach. For the past months, Jim had let her retreat into the calm of the hayloft, but he had never asked why. Her nights in this rustic refuge had become a sanctuary, a place to escape. Clara loved the barn. She loved how it stood proud against the backdrop of an open sky. Inside, it was a world apart, where she could shed the burdens of her life and simply exist. But tonight, Jim's voice pierced through the cozy slumber she had built around herself, forcing her to confront the reality lurking just beneath the surface. It's peaceful up here," she finally replied, a nervous edge in her voice. Jim's brow furrowed, his instinct to protect lighting a spark of concern behind his blue eyes. "But why not tell me?" Clara couldn't meet his gaze. Instead, she stared into the dimness of the barn, the shadows dancing like memories she didn't want to revisit. The last memory of home was a jumbled mix of arguments, of slamming doors, and the suffocating silence that followed. She felt trapped there, an outsider in her own life. The first night she had come to the barn, it had felt like a prison break. The smells of freshly cut hay and the soft whinny of horses had called to her, pulling her away from the chaos she lived in. She had tiptoed past the kitchen, her mother's voice a whirlwind of frustration as she fought with her father about bills and responsibilities. Clara could hardly breathe in that atmosphere where every night ended with tears both silent and loud. I needed to think. Away from it all," she finally confessed, finding her voice against the weight of the moment. Jim stepped closer, drawn in by her vulnerability, his heart chilling to the reality of what she was saying. He asked gently, about everything she thought about her parents, their arguments that echoed in her mind like a haunting melody. About her own uncertainties, a future that felt as distant as a star. Clara opened her mouth and the words poured out, raw and unfiltered, like a river finally breaking through the dam of her worries. "I think about how I don't belong, how I feel invisible at home," she said, her voice trembling. Jim took a moment to absorb her words. The floor of the hayloft creaked under his weight, accentuating the heaviness hanging in the air. This wasn't just about sleeping in the barn, it was about escaping a world that made her feel small. He remembered being young, feeling lost under the weight of expectations and disagreements. The memories were shards of his past that he had long tried to forget. "I can't fix it, you know. I don't have the answers, and even if I did, I wouldn't know how to give them," he admitted. Clara nodded, understanding mingled with relief. For once, someone was listening. "It's just hard. Every day it feels like I'm spinning out of control. Sometimes when you're lost, it's the journey back that shows you who you are," Jim offered. They shared a moment of silence, the distant sounds of crickets filling the air, a reminder that the world kept turning, even in turmoil. Clara had grown heavier with every passing night that she had slept in the hayloft, and yet a sliver of light broke through her heavy heart. Maybe it wasn't just about escaping. Maybe she could find her way back to herself, and it started with speaking her truth. Days turned into weeks, and one evening, Clara found herself settling in the hay with a sense of purpose. She was no longer just hiding, she was beginning to take ownership of her story. She and Jim collaborated on small projects around the farm, planting flowers and painting fences. Each laugh shared, each challenge conquered began to stitch together the fraying edges of her spirit. One afternoon, while they painted the wooden fence bright white against the backdrop of tough greens and blues, Clara realized how much she had grown. There was a new lightness to her being, a shift from solely existing to actively living. She still faced the turbulence back home, but now it felt different. Now she could breathe, but shadows lurked. One evening, Clara returned to the barn after a particularly rough day. She had overheard her parents arguing again. The familiar knot in her stomach tightened. Her mother had cried out for help, and her father had slammed the door, that cacophony of despair that followed her, no matter where she went. It wrapped around her like a cold shroud. Jim was there waiting, an unspoken presence ready to support her as soon as she entered the barn. He looked up, noticing her immediate change in energy. He asked, the concern in his voice palpable. Clara felt the sobs bubbling within her, and she nodded, struggling to keep the facade intact. But the fight within her was weakening. "No," she finally admitted, her voice trembling. Without words, Jim stepped closer, wrapping an arm around her shoulder. That simple act of warmth was enough to crack the dam. Suddenly, Clara found herself spilling everything. The arguments, the emptiness, and the lingering fear that had settled in her chest like a stone. "It feels like it's all falling apart, Jim. I don't know how to handle it." Her words cascaded out in a rush, fearful and fragmented. Jim held her tighter, understanding flooding him like it never had before. He shared stories of his own upbringing, of a family that had battled through their own storms. "You don't have to be the fixer, Clara." The air grew still as Clara absorbed his words. It felt like a lifeline tossed into turbulent waters, innately tethering her back to her own voice. For too long, she had worn the weight of her family's struggles as her own. She realized then that love couldn't be solely rooted in responsibility. It was also about setting boundaries and allowing oneself to breathe. In that moment, the air shifted. The hayloft morphed from a mere refuge into a place of growth, where flowers could ever so slowly bloom even among the dry grass. As the nights turned colder and the holidays approached, Clara began to see clearer. She learned to navigate the storms at home with a newfound strength, embracing the complications without being swallowed by them. With every night spent in the barn, she grew bolder, more confident. She even began to adopt small rituals, writing letters of gratitude, preparing tiny gifts to lighten the atmosphere at home when she returned. One chilly night, she returned to the hayloft after visiting her family, weary but brighter. But tonight, something was different. Words remained unsaid between her and Jim. He sensed a shift, a blossoming spirit in her that he hadn't seen come to life until now. "Hey, Clara," he said, a gentle tone replacing the weighty concern from before. "You've grown so much. You've taken control of your story." That small acknowledgement sent a tremor through her heart. Jim had offered her a home when she needed it most. He had given her the space to reclaim herself amidst the noise. She turned to him, eyes shining brighter than she remembered, filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Jim, for everything. I couldn't have done this without you," she said, feeling her heart swell in her chest. Their journey was far from over. Nights at the hayloft became sacred, all woven into a tapestry of trust and growth. They shared laughter, struggles, and hard-earned victories under the same roof. Clara learned that connection was not just escape, but a bridge to a brighter future, one that was built with understanding and empathy. As winter turned to spring, the first flowers began to bloom in the surrounding fields, and so too did Clara bloom. The darkness that once intertwined with her existence began to unravel, as new friendships formed and community began to swell. The barn remained a sacred space, not as a hideaway, but as a testament to resilience, blooming out of the hay for both Clara and Jim. Together, they carved paths out of their shared struggles, celebrating the transformation from silence to profound connection. And one quiet evening, as they sat in the hayloft, Clara looked out at the horizon, filled with hope. She understood now that even through the fiercest storms, she could rise above, lifting not only herself but others along the way. In that old barn, beneath the scattered stars, she found her voice, and the world became a little brighter, a little more bearable. The moon hung low in the sky, casting soft silver light across the barn. Inside, Clara huddled in the hayloft, surrounded by the familiar scent of dried straw and sweet wood. Night after night, she climbed that ladder, seeking solace from the chaos that echoed in her heart. Only she knew the secret that lay behind those worn wooden doors. The world outside had become too loud, too heavy for her to bear. As she nestled into her makeshift bed, the chill of the night wrapped around her like an old friend. The horses outside gently rustled, their soft whinnies a comforting lullaby. For Clara, this was more than just an escape. It was a sanctuary where she could breathe, away from the demands of her life. But tonight, for the first time, she heard footsteps approaching from below. Jim, the barn's owner, was the kind of man who wore his weariness like a cloak. He was a fixture in the small town, respected yet distant, a man whose life had been shaped by loss and hard work. He watched over the barn like a guardian, and in the dim light he stood at the ladder's base, looking up into the hayloft. "Clara," he called, a deep rumble cutting through the night's silence. Startled, Clara's heart raced. No one had ever asked her that question. They merely accepted her presence. She glanced down at him, his face a mixture of concern and curiosity, and realized that her secret wasn't as hidden as she thought. She hesitated, words tangled in her throat. It's peaceful up here," she finally managed to say, though she knew it was only part of the truth. He echoed, stepping closer, his eyes searching hers. The moonlight cast shadows that danced across his rugged features. His probing struck a chord deep inside her. She had been running away, hadn't she? From the noise, from the fights that echoed through her home, from the weight of expectations that felt like a lead blanket draped over her shoulders. "It's just easier," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper, but something in that moment shifted. Jim was giving her permission to unravel her truth. Clara knew she wasn't just seeking peace in the barn, she was hiding from the storm that brewed within her family. Jim crossed his arms, leaning against the barn's weathered wood. "Tell me what you're running from, Clara." With a heavy sigh, she finally surrendered to the warmth of vulnerability. "You don't know what it's like," she said, her voice trembling. "My parents fight all the time. I can't stand it. It feels like I'm suffocating." For a moment, silence enveloped them. Jim's expression softened, recognizing the weight of Clara's words. He had his own demons, lurking shadows from a life not so far removed from hers. In that quiet space, he found himself remembering the late nights he spent alone, feeling as if life had trapped him in a corner. Clara turned away, not wanting him to see the tears welling in her eyes. "When I'm at home, I feel invisible, like they don't even see me anymore. Up here, at least the hay knows I'm here." "Comfort can be misleading," he said gently. His words hung in the air like a haunting echo, and she felt them penetrate the walls she'd built around her heart. She was safe in the hayloft, but was she truly living? As the weeks passed, Clara continued to retreat to the barn each night, her experiences woven into the fabric of her being. Jim watched her from below, a silent guardian, sensing the battle within her. With each passing night, the questions building in his mind became harder to ignore. Clara was more than just a girl seeking refuge. She was a young woman on a journey that needed to be acknowledged. One crisp autumn evening, just as the leaves began to fall, Clara returned to the barn after a day that felt interminable. The weight of her family's struggles sat heavily on her shoulders, a cloud of dread overshadowing her heart. As she climbed the ladder to her refuge, she noticed Jim sitting quietly on a hay bale, waiting. "Hey," she greeted him, her voice carrying the weight of uncertainty. "Hey yourself," he replied, studying her with an intensity that made her feel both seen and vulnerable. Clara took a moment before she responded, a flicker of doubt crossing her mind. "It's just hard at home." "Sometimes fixing isn't the answer," Jim said, his calm demeanor urging her to open up. She echoed, feeling the unfamiliarity of the words. "Yeah, you can't carry the burden of their struggles alone. You can help, but only if you take care of yourself first." Clara processed his words. Could it really be that simple? Could speaking her truth actually lead her to the clarity she longed for? That night, she stayed in the hayloft longer than usual, mulling over Jim's advice. She realized that the girl hiding amid the hay wasn't just running from her problems. She was holding on to them, believing it was her duty to somehow fix everything. Feeling a flicker of defiance sparking within her, Clara resolved to speak up when she returned home. The next day, she dared to confront her parents, to voice the chaos that had taken over their lives. As she sat at the dinner table, tension crackling in the air, she finally found the courage. Their eyes shifted from their plates, surprise and irritation mingling in their expressions. "Not now, Clara," her father snapped, his frustration boiling just beneath the surface. "No, I mean it. I need you to listen," she insisted, her heart drumming in her chest. "I can't take the fighting anymore." The silence that followed felt heavy, their gazes piercing through her like arrows, but she pressed on, channeling all the courage she'd cultivated in the hayloft. "You don't see me, and you don't see how this affects me." It was brave, maybe even foolish, but she felt the release of a burden she hadn't fully recognized until now. Her parents exchanged looks, surprise softening their frozen features. Something shifted in that moment. The tension began to loosen, just a little, as Clara felt a swell of hope rise within her. Over the next few days, she continued to speak her truth, each conversation diffusing the pressure that had built up at home. Both Jim and Clara were learning. He watched her navigate her chaos, and she grew bolder with each small victory. The barn became a sacred space for their conversations, where shadows could dance but not control their destinies. One evening, Clara climbed up to find Jim awaiting her return, a knowing smile on his face. "It was refreshing," she said, leaning back against the wall, a soft sigh escaping her lips. "I finally felt like I was being heard." "Good," Jim responded, nodding in approval. As winter rolled in, the world transformed into a quiet wonderland. The barn became a refuge not just for Clara, but for other townsfolk seeking warmth from the cold. Community events filled the barn with laughter and music, a revival of hope fueled by connection. Clara helped organize small gatherings, inviting people to share stories, play music, and build relationships long lost. One evening, as a golden sunset painted the horizon, Clara gathered with neighbors as laughter and chatter filled the air. She watched Jim stride across the barn, laughter etched into his face, and she marveled at the evolution of her own life. This was her home, filled with warmth and support, and it had blossomed from her willingness to speak up. But the shadows of her past still loomed. One night, under a blanket of stars, she returned to the hayloft, feeling the familiar tug of emotions. She looked up at Jim, who was sitting comfortably on the hay, his face serene. He asked, sensing her unease. "Sometimes I still feel trapped," she confessed, her voice barely carrying above a whisper. Jim fixed his gaze on her, and in that shared silence, she recognized his wisdom, the way he carried his past with him but had forged a path toward renewal. "It's okay to feel that way. It's part of healing. Remember, it's not about forgetting, it's about growing from what once was. Acknowledge your feelings, Clara." His words resonated deeply in her heart. This journey wasn't a linear path, it was messy, filled with ups and downs. But acknowledging the past was crucial for her growth. And so Clara learned to embrace those shadows as part of her story. She poured her heart into community service, helping others who struggled with similar issues. The barn became more than a refuge. It transformed into a hub for healing, a platform for people to share their stories, to breathe, and to connect. One bright spring day, as birds began to sing and the sun warmed the air, Clara stood outside the barn, her heart pulsing with purpose. The community had come together to celebrate their resilience, and she realized the beauty of pulling people closer through shared experiences. She found herself speaking to the crowd, the warmth of their gazes meeting hers, and fear transformed into an empowering strength. "I know what it feels like to carry the weight of silence, but sharing your truth can break those chains," Clara said, her voice unwavering. The crowd erupted into applause, their warmth wrapping around her like a cocoon. In that moment, an undeniable truth settled within her. She had stepped beyond the shadows of her past, reclaiming her narrative one word at a time. Later, she found Jim watching from the edge of the crowd, pride painted across his face. "You did it, Clara," he said, his voice filled with warmth. "I couldn't have done it without you," Clara replied, feeling a swell of gratitude. The barn wasn't just a temporary escape anymore. It had become a symbol of growth, connection, and hope, a bridge linking past struggles to a future filled with promise. As seasons changed, Clara blossomed. The barn remained a constant, a place where stories intertwined, where laughter met tears, and where healing was a shared journey. Each night spent in the hayloft was no longer just about hiding, but about cultivating community and resilience. And so Clara continued to thrive, not just as the girl who slept in the hayloft, but as a woman unafraid to confront the shadows, discovering the strength to hold both joy and grief. In that sacred space, under the twinkling stars, she found her voice, not just for herself, but for all those who needed to feel seen, heard, and loved. The moon hung high in the sky, casting a silvery glow through the cracks in the barn's wooden slats. Inside, Clara curled up in the hayloft, the soft rustle of straw a familiar lullaby. Each night, she climbed the rickety ladder, escaping to this sanctuary. But tonight, as she settled into her nest of golden hay, the comforting scent of earth and sweetness mingled with something else: anticipation. For weeks now, Jim, the owner of the barn, had noticed her nightly routine. He rarely ventured up to the hayloft, respecting her solitude, but a lingering curiosity began to gnaw at him. What drove this girl to retreat into the hay night after night? As the clock struck midnight, the barn was enveloped in silence, save for the distant sounds of nature. Jim stood below the loft, the faint light from his lantern flickering. He hesitated for a moment before calling out, "Clara." The words hung in the air, shattering the stillness. Clara froze, heart racing. No one had ever asked her that question, and she hadn't even thought about how to answer. "Because it's peaceful," she finally offered, her voice barely making its way through the wooden beams. Jim repeated, a note of skepticism lacing his tone. Clara shifted, tucking her knees up to her chest. The weight of the question felt heavy, like an anvil pressing down on her. "It's just easier up here," she said, avoiding his gaze. He pressed gently, his curiosity unwavering. Something in his tone encouraged her. Even though she didn't fully know him, she sensed sincerity. Clara took a shaky breath, feeling the dam within her begin to crack. "At home, it's just loud. I can't think." Jim's eyes softened. He nodded slowly, as if he understood more than she was saying. The barn had seen many stories, his own life written across its walls, but he hadn't expected to encounter this one. He asked, and suddenly the air felt electric, a possibility sparking between them. "I can't," Clara replied, her voice cracking. "Burdening someone isn't the same as sharing the weight," Jim said. In that moment, Clara felt a flicker of hope. Maybe she didn't have to carry it alone. The truth loomed behind her words, an untold story wrapping around her like a shroud. She just had to break free from it. Days turned into weeks, and the nights in the hayloft transformed into something more profound. She continued to seek refuge, but now, armed with Jim's kindness, she found herself contemplating the shadows she had been hiding from. With each visit, she felt drawn closer to revealing her truth. One evening, after another long day of silence at home, she returned to the barn with a swirl of emotions churning inside her. As she climbed up, she noticed Jim leaning against the wooden railing below, waiting for her. "Hey, Clara," he greeted with a gentle smile. "Yesterday was hard," she admitted as she perched atop the bales. "The fights, they just keep happening." Jim approached, a measured concern deepening his expression. "You don't have to stay silent." Clara was taken aback. The walls that had kept her bottled up began to crumble. "I don't know if I can talk about it," she confessed, her voice trembling. "Messy is part of life," Jim assured her, standing firmly beneath her. His words ignited something inside her. Could she really gain strength from revealing the truths that had long gone unspoken? Sitting there, surrounded by the scent of hay and the shadows of the past, Clara felt a shift within herself. Perhaps it was time to lace the words together to unravel the chaos inside. She took a deep breath, allowing her heart to freefall into the unknown. "My parents, they fight over money, over expectations," she began slowly, catching Jim's unwavering gaze. "I'm the one who feels it most." Just saying it out loud felt like releasing the tension that had coiled itself tightly around her heart. "Some nights, they don't even notice when I leave the house. They think I'm just the girl with no opinions, the quiet one." Jim nodded, slowly absorbing her words. "Your voice matters, Clara." For the first time in what felt like forever, Clara felt the quiet armor around her heart crack. Speaking her truth had unlocked something deep inside her, a space for connection she had long thought lost. As time passed, Clara's resolve grew. She began to recognize the strength in vulnerability rather than seeing it as a weakness. With Jim's nudging encouragement, she started taking small steps to reclaim her voice, speaking up about her feelings during family dinners, setting boundaries, and asserting her presence. One evening, as Clara returned to the barn, she felt a mix of anticipation and nervousness. Jim was there, wrapped in the comforting glow of the lantern light, and as he met her eyes, she knew she had to share what was stirring within her. Today was different, she began, her tone vibrant with newfound confidence. I spoke up during dinner. I told them how I felt. It felt. Jim smiled, pride radiating from him. That's fantastic, Clara. See, Clara could feel the warmth spreading in her chest, igniting a fire she thought had gone out. It's still hard, though. That's okay, Jim replied. Change takes time. You're planting seeds now. Emboldened by Jim's encouragement, Clara continued to speak up at home, pushing through the discomfort that followed. Each night she climbed to the hayloft, she felt stronger, the roots of her confidence digging deeper. Yet, even as she emerged in her own life, shadows lingered. One particularly stormy evening, Clara returned to the barn, her heart heavy with doubt. The familiar chaos at home seemed to creep back, whispering insidious things that reminded her of the fights she couldn't escape. I don't know if I can do this anymore, Jim, she admitted as she flopped onto the hay, staring at the ceiling. Rain drummed steadily on the roof, creating a sense of urgency that matched her turmoil. Talk to me, Jim urged gently, sitting down beside her. I'm trying, she said, tears escaping and coursing down her cheeks. But it feels like I'm fighting a battle on two fronts. At home, I'm invisible, and out here. Clara, Jim said, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder, you're not defined by just one thing. You can be both. The journey isn't linear. It has twists and turns. His words wrapped around her like a warm embrace. Clara took a deep breath and closed her eyes, letting the sounds of the storm wash over her. She realized vulnerability was no easy road, but it was necessary for growth. Each night spent in the hayloft became a reaffirmation, a sanctuary of trust woven between their narratives. The evenings drifted into weeks, each day illuminating Clara's path toward reclamation. The barn morphed into more than just a refuge. It became the place where the threads of connection were woven together. Community members joined her late-night gatherings, sharing stories that resonated, breaking the silence that had long plagued them. One night, Clara gathered her courage and shared her journey with neighbors, her voice steady and unwavering. The warmth of their supportive responses filled the room. For every word spoken, a bond formed, and in that moment Clara understood the power of vulnerability. It could not only mend her heart but also draw others together. As the community grew, so did Clara's strength. The barn became a hub for healing, a space where secrets were whispered and joys celebrated. Each evening was steeped in laughter, warmth, and shared experiences, a reminder that they were all in this together. One fateful night, while standing beneath a shimmering canopy of stars, Clara felt a sense of belonging wash over her. She glanced over at Jim, who watched her with a proud smile. "You've bloomed," he said, his voice warm. "Thank you for believing in me," she replied, feeling gratitude swell in her heart. In those moments, deep inside the heart of the barn, Clara learned that healing wasn't linear. It shifted and swayed, filled with peaks and valleys of emotion. The shadows would come and go, but they no longer held her captive. With Jim's friendship and the community's support, she had transformed the chaos of her upbringing into a tapestry of resilience. Time passed, the seasons changed, and Clara settled into her new role as a leader, a voice for others standing at their own crossroads. The barn thrived with life, transforming into a sanctuary for all seeking solace from their struggles, each story weaving together in a collective journey. And as the final echoes of the barn's door creaked shut behind her each night, Clara knew she had carved out a place for herself. She had stepped beyond the dark confines of the hayloft, embracing the beauty of vulnerability and connection, finding strength in community and in her own voice. Each night, she climbed to the hayloft, but now it felt different. It was a place to reflect and grow, a refuge transformed into a beacon of light that illuminated the way for others. And in that warmth, she found her true home. Clara had not just slept in the hayloft. She had learned to thrive in its embrace, forging her path anew, unafraid to step into the light. The soft creaking of wooden boards echoed faintly through the barn as Clara slipped inside, her heart beating a rapid rhythm. It was past midnight, the moon hanging low and almost full, glowing softly through the cracks in the barn walls. The smell of fresh hay filled the air, wrapping around her like a cozy embrace. Each night it felt like a homecoming, an escape from the world that felt too heavy and loud. But tonight felt different. Tonight she sensed an unsettling tension hanging in the air, permeating the familiar space she had claimed as her own for months. She climbed the ladder to the hayloft, careful to be quiet, her heart racing with excitement and a touch of fear. She had grown fond of this place where memories faded into tranquility, yet the questions had begun to swirl. As she settled into her usual spot, cradled by the golden hay, her mind wandered to the sound that had broken the idyllic silence. Jim, the barn's owner, had noticed her nightly visits. Each time he spotted her silhouette against the moonlight, his brow would furrow with concern. An older man with rugged hands and a heart that felt the weight of years, Jim was someone the community respected. Yet it was clear he worried for her in ways she had not anticipated. Just as Clara began to relax, she heard footsteps. Heavy and deliberate, they settled near the ladder. She held her breath, gripping the straw tighter, knowing instantly it was Jim. She braced for the inevitable confrontation she had been dreading. His voice cut through the crisp air, deep and gravelly. Her heart dropped. The question hung in the air, heavy and oppressive. No one had ever asked her that, and she hadn't prepared for it. Words tangled themselves in her throat. Because she finally stammered, though she knew that wasn't the whole truth. Jim echoed, skepticism tinging his voice. Clara flinched at the accusation. She wasn't running away, she was seeking refuge, wasn't she? It's just easier up here, she managed to say, her voice trembling as the enormity of it all began to settle over her. He pressed, his tone softening as he took a step closer. Clara hesitated, feeling the warmth of the hay beneath her as she contemplated his question. A flood of memories rushed at her. The chaos at home, the arguments that flared up like wildfires, the feeling of being invisible amidst the storm. As tears threatened to spill over, she finally voiced what she had kept bottled up. At home, it's just loud. They fight all the time, and I feel like I'm drowning in it. The vulnerability in her words stirred something deep within Jim. He of all people understood what it was like to feel lost in one's own life. For years, he had wrestled with the shadows of his past, losing loved ones to the chaos of living. He felt a deep-seated urge to help this girl who had lit up the darkness of his barn with her presence. "Clara," he said gently, "you don't have to carry that burden alone. I'm here." Words spiraled through Clara's mind, caught in a cyclone of fear and hope. Could she really share her struggles? Would it even help? But the kindness in Jim's voice rooted her to the spot like a thread pulling her closer to the surface. She took a shaky breath, the knot in her stomach loosening just a bit. "I don't want to burden anyone," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Burdening someone isn't the same as sharing the weight," he replied. The invitation to unburden herself felt like a lifeline tossed into a stormy sea. She could hear the distant rumble of thunder outside, matching the turmoil within her. What if she could finally release the heaviness that followed her everywhere? Clara asked, her heart racing. "I'm just a girl who sleeps in your barn." Jim sighed, his gaze steady and sincere. "Sometimes the people we barely know can unexpectedly touch our hearts. Life can be hard for everyone." Clara remained silent, wrestling with the notion that perhaps vulnerability could breed connection. The walls she had built around her heart began to tremble. "Okay," she finally said, her voice trembling. As the evening deepened, Clara began to unravel the threads binding her pain. She spoke of nights filled with her parents' arguments, the bitterness that hung in the air, choking any semblance of peace. She talked about feeling like a ghost in her own home, invisible to the chaos that shaped her world. Jim listened intently, nodding, occasionally sharing his own experiences. "You're stronger than you realize," he said. Comforting warmth filled Clara as she felt the burden on her heart begin to lift. For the first time in ages, she felt seen. They shared their stories, laughter mingling with tears, and as the stars twinkled through the barn's roof, Clara began to embrace the darkness instead of running from it. But as comforting as those nights became, reality still loomed large. Each return to the barn was marked by the chaos that awaited her at home. The arguments resumed under the roof where she had once felt free. Thoughts of her parents' struggles echoed in her mind, dulling the light that began to spark inside her. One particularly stormy evening, Clara returned, the skies outside rumbling in tandem with her fears. "I don't think I can do this anymore, Jim," she admitted as she stared at the ground, feeling small and lost again. he asked, concern etched into his face. It all feels pointless, she confessed, her voice breaking. I try to speak up at home, but it doesn't change anything. I'm still just Clara caught between their fights. Wanting to see change is a good thing, Jim said, sitting beside her. But understand that change doesn't happen overnight. It's like the seasons. You plant a seed and hope it grows. Clara processed his words, the warmth of understanding washing over her. Strength isn't about never feeling weak. It's about standing back up when you've been knocked down, he reminded her. Those words struck a chord deep within Clara. Tears spilled down her cheeks as the weight of her frustrations flooded over her like the rain outside. Yet in her sorrow, she felt the comforting presence of Jim beside her, a steady reminder that she wasn't alone in this fight. As the weeks passed, Clara began to navigate her struggles with newfound resolve. She talked openly with her parents about how their arguments affected her, slowly chipping away at the silence that had filled their family. Each conversation took effort, and while not all of them went well, some began to shift ever so slightly. Still, she returned to the hayloft every night, the comforting scent of hay grounding her amidst the chaos, and Jim became a confidant, her anchor. They exchanged stories, their laughter mingling with the moonlight, and it reinforced the bond that had blossomed in that small space. One evening sunset painting the horizon with hues of orange and pink, Clara arrived at the barn to find a new community of townsfolk gathered inside. They had come to share their stories, authoring their own journeys of struggle, mirroring Clara's own path. Jim asked, motioning to the circle of people. With the group gathered around, Clara felt a surge of courage. She cleared her throat and began to share her journey, her voice shaking but growing stronger with each word. As she recounted her fight against the silence and invisibility, she caught the eyes of her listeners, their expressions encouraging. And just like that, the tension in her heart faded, replaced by a sense of liberation. She was no longer standing alone, but rather walking hand in hand with others who felt the same way. Laughter mingled with tears, each story weaving into the fabric of the barn's walls. After that gathering, Clara felt lighter, as if a significant weight had been lifted. She realized that while her journey was ongoing, she was no longer defined by the chaos at home. She was carving out her own identity, one that embraced both the light and the dark. As seasons changed, so did Clara's relationships. She found small moments of joy amidst the struggles. The barn had transformed into a beacon of hope in the community, and its warmth was contagious. More people began to gather, creating a tapestry of shared experiences and newfound friendships. One evening, as Clara stepped into the barn, she felt an electric pulse in the air. The laughter of children mixing with the deep, soothing tones of adults rang out, drowning out the whispers of doubt that once plagued her. Jim stood at the center, smiling with pride as he always did. She asked, eyes wide with curiosity. "It's a community night," he explained. "We're starting something new." Clara's heart swelled. She could hardly believe how far she had come. The shy girl who had once hidden in the shadows of the hayloft, now standing at the heart of a thriving community. As she took a seat among the bustling crowd, she felt the warmth of camaraderie envelop her. The laughter, the stories, the hope, they filled the barn to bursting, transforming that sanctuary into a vibrant home. In that moment, Clara realized she had not only found her voice but had become a guiding force for others. The hayloft, once a sanctuary of solitude, had transformed into a space where connections blossomed, where vulnerability met courage, where strength was born out of shared experiences. As the night wore on, Clara turned to Jim, gratitude spilling from her heart. "I couldn't have done this without you," she said, tears of joy glistening in her eyes. Jim smiled, a familiar warmth enveloping them both. "You've always had it in you, Clara." As the festivities continued around them, she knew she would never go back to being the girl who simply slept in the hayloft. She had become so much more than that, an architect of her own destiny, a beacon for those navigating their own storms. And as the stars winked down through the barn's roof, Clara realized the journey wouldn't end here. It would continue to intertwine with the lives of others, a beautiful tapestry she would help weave, one thread at a time. They were all in this together, and together they would rise. The moon hung high, bathing the barn in an ethereal glow. Inside, Clara nestled into her familiar mound of hay, a makeshift bed that had become her sanctuary. Every night was the same, climbing the rickety ladder, feeling the weight of the world slip off her shoulders, if only for a few hours. Outside, the sounds of crickets serenaded the night, weaving a soothing melody, while the soft rustle of straw cocooned her in warmth. But tonight felt different. There was a tension in the air, a thrum of unspoken questions hovering just beyond her reach. Jim, the barn's owner, had been watching her closely, his brow creased with concern each time he caught a glimpse of her silhouette illuminated by the moonlight. As Clara drifted off, she heard him approach. The heavy thump of his boots echoed in the barn. He called out from below, his voice carrying a weight she hadn't expected. Her heart sank. No one had ever asked her that. She froze, the question hanging above her like a storm cloud. She didn't want to answer, didn't want to reveal how lost she felt, how the chaos of her home life loomed like a dark shadow. Jim repeated, shaking his head slightly. She wasn't running away. She was seeking solace, wasn't she? But deep down, she felt the truth of his words. She glanced down, avoiding his gaze. "It's easier up here," she said quietly, feeling her cheeks flush. He pressed, his voice firm but still gentle. This man, with lines etched into his face from years of hard work, cared. Clara could see that, and it stirred something in her. "Because at home it's just loud," she admitted, a shaky breath escaping her lips. "They fight all the time. I can't think." A moment of silence enveloped them like a thick fog. She thought she saw sympathy in his expression, an understanding that cut through the cacophony of her thoughts. Jim nodded slowly, taking a step closer to the base of the ladder. "You don't have to carry that burden alone, Clara," he said, his voice low and steady. "I'm here." His offer felt like a lifeline thrown into turbulent waters. Could she really share her turmoil? "I don't want to burden anyone," she replied, her voice wavering. "Burdening someone isn't the same as sharing the weight." "You don't always have to carry it alone," he said. His words urged her, igniting a flicker of bravery she hadn't known she possessed. Clara took a deep breath, feeling the weight on her heart begin to shift. Maybe she could open the floodgates, let the emotions spill out, and see what happened. For weeks she had slipped into the hayloft each night, her thoughts a mix of chaos and longing for peace. She had learned to hide in the comforts of the barn, but now, sitting in its embrace, something was different. Maybe it was the way Jim looked at her, as if he truly wanted to understand. I guess I can try," Clara said, her voice softer now, almost like a whisper. As the evening deepened, she began to unravel the threads of her life. She talked about her parents, how the turmoil had rooted itself deep in their home, like weeds choking out the beauty of a garden. "They fight a lot and I feel trapped," she confessed. "I can't stand it anymore." The vulnerability spilling from her heart surprised even her. Tears pooled in her eyes and she fought them back as Jim listened, nodding gently. "You're stronger than you know," he murmured. With each confession, the air lightened, the burdens becoming easier to bear. Clara shared her pain openly, letting the fear of vulnerability dissolve in the warmth of acceptance. The fights at home, the feeling of invisibility, they no longer felt so insurmountable when she spoke them into existence. But inner turmoil didn't disappear overnight. By day, the weight crept back, hovering over her, dragging her down. Still, every night she returned to the barn, drawn by the comforting presence of Jim and the hayloft that felt like home. They spent countless hours talking, laughing, and learning from one another. One crisp autumn evening, as rustling leaves danced outside, Clara climbed the ladder, her thoughts swirling. She had rehearsed what she was going to say, but the moment the ladder creaked beneath her, doubts began to creep in. What if Jim didn't want to hear her anymore? "Hey there," Jim greeted, leaning against a bale of hay, a familiar smile on his face. "I'm trying to be brave," she admitted, feeling the warmth of vulnerability wash over her. Jim regarded her with the kindness of someone who had weathered their own storms. "Change takes time, Clara. You're planting seeds now." His encouragement planted seeds of hope in her heart. Just as flowers bloom after a long winter, perhaps there was a chance for her to grow too. The weight of her fears loosened slightly, tempered by the promise of a brighter tomorrow. Days turned into weeks, and as winter approached, Clara found solace in the unpredictability of life. She visited the barn more frequently now. The once familiar sensation of isolation began to melt away. She was building connections outside her family, finding understanding in the community around her. One frigid evening, Clara entered the barn to find Jim organizing a small gathering. Townsfolk filtered in, laughter floating through the air like a warm embrace. Clara's heart fluttered with excitement and a touch of trepidation. Jim asked, motioning to the group with a twinkle in his eye. "I don't know," Clara said, uncertainty creeping in. "Your story, Clara. Everyone has a story worth sharing. You may not realize it yet, but you are already a part of this community," he replied. With a deep breath, Clara stepped forward, the glow of lantern light illuminating her way. She felt a surge of warmth and courage, bolstered by the faces surrounding her. "I want to share something," she said, her voice steadying as she opened her heart. Her words flowed like a river, pouring out the chaos she had bottled up for so long. She spoke of the nights filled with fear and uncertainty, her struggle to find her voice amid the noise of her family. The crowd listened intently, wrapping her in a cocoon of empathy. Clara's heart swelled with warmth as she noticed how others began to nod, recognizing pieces of their own stories reflected in hers. As the evening unfolded, laughter mingled with tears, and the barn transformed into a space of healing and connection. Clara found herself amidst a community that shared their own struggles and triumphs, each story adding another thread to the tapestry. After that night, the barn became a hub of activity. Jim led gatherings where people shared their narratives, giving life to the stories buried inside them. And as the weeks turned to months, things shifted within Clara's family too. In the midst of her newfound strength and community, she faced her parents again. Armed with the courage she had cultivated in the Hayloft, Clara sat them down one evening, the weight of the world pressing on her shoulders. She asked, her voice steady but trembling slightly. Her parents exchanged glances, curiosity mixed with a hint of apprehension. Her mother asked, the tension palpable. "I feel invisible in this family. Your fights hurt me," she said, holding back tears. For the first time, her parents took a step back, their faces softening. Clara felt the dam she had built begin to crack. With each word she shared, she noticed their expressions shifting. They were listening. Days turned into weeks, and little by little, conversations began to flow more freely at home. The fights subsided, and while challenges still lingered, there was an undeniable shift. Her parents began to acknowledge her, and together they started to rebuild the broken pieces of their family. One sunny afternoon, as Clara returned to the barn, she felt lighter than air. She knew she had fought hard to find her voice, and it was finally blooming. As she climbed the ladder to the hayloft, she felt a sense of belonging seeping into her heart, one that had eluded her for far too long. "Welcome back," Jim called out with a grin, standing at the threshold. "I have," she replied, beaming. "Things are changing. I knew you had it in you," he said, pride evident in his voice. In the warmth of the hayloft, Clara felt a connection bloom between them. It was deepened by shared struggles and triumphs, a bond forged in the crucible of vulnerability. As days turned into nights, she continued to gather with the community, each meeting further solidifying their connections. Clara began to organize events, inviting everyone to share their stories, nourishing the bonds that had formed. The barn had transformed from just a refuge into something much more, a living, breathing space of hope, connection, and healing. And as the seasons shifted once again, Clara watched the flowers bloom in the fields, a reflection of her own growth. One fateful evening, when the sun dipped low in the sky, Clara stood before the crowd, heart racing. The barn thrummed with anticipation. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice resonating with conviction. "This community has taught me that sharing our stories can be the thing that connects us most." The crowd erupted in applause, warmth and gratitude washing over her, and she realized as she stood before her friends and neighbors that she had transformed into the very person she had longed to be, a voice for the voiceless, a beacon of strength even in her own storms. In that moment, Clara felt the weight of the world lift from her shoulders. The night was alive with laughter, with stories intertwined, and the glow of connection lit the barn brighter than ever. She had done it. She had not only carved out her space, but also created a home for others, an entire community transformed through shared experiences, where each voice mattered. Climbing back up to the hayloft that night, she knew she would continue to grow. She wouldn't just sleep there. The hayloft had become her platform, a testament to resilience, a place where hope flourished and every story mattered. Every thread woven together was a promise to be seen, to be heard, and to lift one another in the journey ahead. And as Clara lay beneath the stars, she felt, for the first time, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The stars twinkled like a million tiny diamonds scattered across the vast night sky, their glow illuminating the abandoned barn nestled at the edge of town. Inside, a young woman named Rachel lay curled up in a mound of hay, her heart racing as she listened to the distant sounds of the world outside. To anyone who might have seen her, she was just a girl finding refuge in an old barn, escaping the chaos of life. But for Rachel, every night in that hayloft transformed the ordinary into something sacred. Each day after school, she wandered to the barn, a place untouched by time, where the worries of the world seemed to dissipate into the dusty beams and soft whispers of hay. The routine felt like salvation, an oasis in the desert of her daily existence. Every night as she climbed the rickety ladder to her sanctuary, the familiar scent of dried grass and wood surrounded her, offering a fleeting tranquility that she yearned for. But an undercurrent of anxiety pulsed through her veins, growing stronger as the nights passed. For a while, Jim, the barn's owner, had noticed the girl who took refuge in the hayloft. He was an older man, weathered but wise, with eyes that had seen both joy and sorrow. He had watched her from a distance, wondering about her story, as he kept the barn and the horses in his care. One crisp autumn evening, the air felt electric as Rachel settled into her usual spot. She pulled her worn blanket tight around her shoulders, the weight of the world settling heavily on her chest. Just then, the sound of footsteps broke the stillness, and she glanced down to see Jim standing at the base of the ladder, his strong silhouette framed by the dim light filtering through the barn. "Rachel," he called, his voice deep and firm. Her heart raced. She had hoped he would remain unaware of her little sanctuary, a place where she could hide and feel safe. "Sure," she replied, trying to sound calm. He stepped closer, concern etched on his face. Rachel hesitated, panic rising as she held her breath. "It's peaceful up here," she stammered, though even she could hear the weakness of her words. Jim echoed, skepticism painting his voice. The accusation stung, and she felt her cheeks flush. She wasn't running away. She was seeking solace, a small oasis of comfort amid the storm raging within her life. "I'm not running away," she managed to say quietly. He pressed gently, his concern evident as he gazed up at her. Rachel looked away, unraveling the truth she had been clutching so tightly. "At home, it's loud. There's fighting, yelling, it never stops. I can't think, can't breathe." Jim's gaze softened, and he leaned back against the barn wall, searching her face for signs of what lay beneath. He hadn't meant to pry, but he couldn't shake the feeling that Rachel was more than just a girl seeking a place to sleep. She was carrying something heavy, a weight that begged to be acknowledged. "Running can feel necessary," he said slowly, "but you don't always have to carry that burden alone." Rachel felt a flicker of hope at his words, a lifeline tossed into the dark waters of her turmoil. Could she really open up? She had been so used to hiding, building walls to protect herself from the pain. But there was an invitation in Jim's voice, an understanding that felt uncharacteristically safe. Taking a deep breath, she decided to share. "It's my parents. They fight a lot and it hurts. Sometimes it feels like I'm not even there, like I don't exist when they're at each other's throats. I come here to escape that," she said, her voice trembling as tears threatened to spill. The honesty hung in the air, heavy yet freeing, filling the quiet barn with a palpable tension. Jim simply nodded, allowing her space to breathe through the pain. "You're not invisible, Rachel. You matter. Your feelings matter," he said softly. His reassurance struck a chord deep in her heart. For the first time, she felt the shadows of her life receding, the weight of her secrets lifting as she began to forge a bond built on empathy. They spoke for hours, their shared stories wrapping around them like a warm blanket. Days turned into weeks. Each evening, Rachel climbed back into the hayloft, her sanctuary now a place of connection. She and Jim continued to share their thoughts until the stars consumed the sky, the barn becoming a refuge for both their souls. But mornings ushered in the familiar tension at home. Her parents' arguments echoed in her mind, leaving her feeling trapped again as she navigated between worlds. Each time she arrived at the barn, the presence of the hayloft soothed her aching heart, yet it couldn't fully erase the turmoil she faced. One night, a chill swept through the air as she climbed the ladder to the loft, feeling the weight of the world upon her. Jim had encouraged her to confront her parents, to speak openly about her feelings, but standing at that precipice felt daunting. Whispered as she sank into the hay, fear creeping back in. Jim asked, his voice calm but probing. "Maybe they'll fight bigger or they won't listen at all," she said, battling the knots twisting in her stomach. "Fear holds us back from our potential," Jim offered quietly. "You had the courage to share your struggles with me." The words resonated within her. Maybe fear was holding her hostage, locking her in a cage made of doubt and uncertainty. That night she made a silent promise to herself. She would The next evening, as dusk painted the sky with shades of purple and gold, she steeled herself for the conversation with her parents. With every step toward home, her heartbeat echoed in her ears. She took a deep breath and pushed open the door, steeling herself against the familiar noise that exploded from the kitchen. Her mother snapped, frustration dripping from her voice. Rachel started, but the words got lost, tangled in throat. Her father cut in, his tone sharp. But tonight, Rachel wasn't backing down. She took a breath, forcing the lump in her throat down. She managed, her voice steady despite the storm rising inside of her. Her parents paused, exchanging confused glances. The air was thick with tension, but Rachel pressed on. "I've felt invisible in this family. When you fight, I can't take it." Silence consumed the room, broken only by the hum of the fridge and the distant ticking of a clock. Rachel's heart raced. The vulnerability she had long shielded now laid bare before them. "I didn't realize you felt that way," her mother finally said, her voice softer now. Rachel shot back, her own emotions surfacing, in tearing each other down. "I want to feel like I'm a part of this family." Slowly, a shift happened. The harshness in her parents' eyes softened, and Rachel felt hope blossom like a fragile flower breaking through concrete. They exchanged glances, and for the first time she saw a flicker of understanding. That night, with trembling hands and an open heart, Rachel planted the first seeds of change at home. It wasn't all at once, and sometimes the darkness still crept in, but she began to see moments of light cracks in the walls that had built up over the years. In the following weeks, she continued to visit the barn, forging a deeper bond with Jim as they exchanged laughter and stories, and each meeting filled the gaps that had long felt empty. The hayloft became a place of healing, a refuge where the weight of the world felt lighter. One evening, Rachel arrived to see Jim already sitting on a hay bale, a knowing smile warming his features. "You look different," he observed. "I think I'm beginning to find my voice," she replied, her heart swelling with the truth. "You've grown remarkably," he said, pride evident in his voice. "You're not just surviving anymore, Rachel." As winter settled in, the barn remained a place of transformation. Its wooden beams echoed the laughter and sorrow that surrounded them, a tapestry of experiences woven together, reflecting the community they had built. One fateful night, as snow blanketed the earth outside, Rachel gathered the townsfolk in the barn, inviting them to share their stories too. As she stood in front of the crowd, she felt a surge of purpose filling the air. "Tonight is about connection," she said, her voice steady. "We all have our struggles." The warmth in the barn enveloped her as voices began to rise, echoing with honesty and vulnerability. Each story shared felt like a thread in the community's fabric, connecting them deeper, building trust, and allowing healing to take place. As laughter and tears mingled, Rachel realized she was surrounded by people who understood the weight of their stories. Her journey had come full circle. The hayloft that had once been a sanctuary of solitude had blossomed into a home for collective healing. One evening, months later, Rachel stood at the barn, watching as the snow melted away, leaving blooms of color on the earth. She felt different, transformed by every moment spent in that loft, every word spoken in trust. "Thank you for everything," she said to Jim, who stood beside her, pride radiating from his gaze. Jim nodded, understanding the journey they had shared. "You had it in you all along, Rachel." In the heart of that old barn, Rachel understood that she had found her strength, transformed through vulnerability and the courage to connect. The battles at home weren't entirely over, but she no longer faced them alone. She had cultivated a voice that was hers, a voice that would carry on well beyond the walls of the hayloft. As the sun set over the horizon, Rachel promised herself that she would embrace every journey ahead, knowing that her story was part of something bigger, a beautiful tapestry woven with the threads of community, resilience, and above all, love. The moon hung heavy in the sky, its silver light spilling through the cracks of the old barn as Rachel made her way up the rickety ladder to the hayloft. Every night, she repeated this ritual, seeking refuge among the sweet scent of dried straw and the comforting rustle of animals. But tonight, something inside her felt different. The air was thick with tension, electric, as if the barn itself waited for something to happen. For weeks now, Jim, the owner of the barn, had observed the girl who slipped away to this hidden sanctuary. At first, he thought nothing of it. After all, everyone had their secrets, their hiding places. But as the cool nights turned into a routine, questions began to swirl through his mind. Why this girl? Why the hayloft? When Rachel arrived, she curled up on her mound of hay and allowed herself to breathe, the tranquility washing over her like a gentle wave. It was a sweet escape from the turmoil that awaited her at home, where every word was a weapon in the ongoing war of her parents' arguments. The barn was her safe haven, but in the dim light, a new tension took root as she sensed Jim's gaze. Jim's voice thundered through the stillness, deep and commanding like a bolt of lightning. The command pierced through the comforting haze, jolting Rachel from her thoughts. Panic flushed her cheeks as she peered down from her perch, where Jim stood solid and serious, casting an elongated shadow in the barn's dim light. For a fleeting moment, she contemplated hiding, but she sensed he wasn't going to let this go. His eyes reflected genuine concern, and the weight of the question hung heavily in the air. Rachel felt her heart plummet. "It's peaceful," she replied, but even she could hear the hollow echo of her words, a feeble defense against the gravity of the truth. Jim echoed, crossing his arms, muscles taut beneath his flannel shirt. She snapped back, the defensiveness rising within her like a tidal wave. She had never truly considered the reality of Jim's question. But hasn't that been exactly what she was doing for the last few months? His voice softened but didn't waver, urging her to confront her fears. The truth clawed at her insides like a caged animal desperate to escape. Because, at home, it's just so loud. They fight all the time. "It hurts to listen," she admitted, her voice trembling. A heavy silence settled between them, a kind of stillness that can only exist when someone lays their soul bare. Jim shifted slightly, crossing his arms tighter, and the weight in her heart became a little lighter. "You're not invisible, Rachel." In that moment, something cracked open inside her. She was used to blending into the chaos, but here, with Jim's gaze locked onto her, she felt seen for the first time in a long time. What if she found the strength to say more? What if she revealed the pain that had long been trapped within her? Taking a step forward, Rachel took a deep breath. "My parents, they fight about everything: money, time, love. And in the middle of it, I feel small, like I don't exist. But here, I'm not just stuck in their arguments. I can..." "Stop," Jim interrupted gently. "You don't have to justify anything." The warmth in his voice wrapped around her like a summer breeze, and tears brimmed in her eyes. Suddenly, the tension she felt every time she returned home didn't seem quite so insurmountable. "I've been hiding," Rachel confessed, her voice cracking. "Not just at home, but from everything. I thought if I came here, it would be better." Jim nodded, his brow furrowing in thought. "Sometimes we think we can outrun our problems, but eventually they catch up to us." Those words echoed in Rachel's mind long after their conversation ended. That night, as she lay in the hay, the weight of her unresolved emotions finally broke free. She let the tears flow, whispering silent promises to herself that things could change. As days turned into weeks, Rachel continued to meet Jim in the barn, and their shared conversations became a soothing balm to her fractured life. She discovered that she was not alone in feeling lost. Others in her community struggled too, each with their own burdens hidden beneath the surface. Yet, every time she returned home, the darkness loomed closer. The arguments between her parents felt like they were escalating, morphing from whispers into full-blown shouting matches that echoed through the walls of her heart. One particularly stormy evening, Rachel entered the barn, navigating between her feelings of excitement and dread. Jim was already waiting, leaning against a post, the warm glow of the lantern casting shadows across his face. "Hey, Rachel," he called, his voice steady. "I don't know if I'm ready to talk about it," she replied, her heart pounding. "Things at home just seem to keep getting worse. I feel torn, like I'm caught between worlds." "Change takes time," he assured her. "Just like you found a place here, your parents need time to sort through their struggles. You've started speaking up for yourself, keep it up." As Jim spoke, Rachel could feel the warmth of his words wrapping around her, igniting a flicker of hope. She wanted to believe that people could change, that love could conquer discord. But that night, something inside Rachel shifted. While she fought to remain hopeful, the echoes of her parents' fighting coursed through her mind. With every argument she overheard, every tear shed, the shadows grew darker, threatening to envelop her entirely. One late afternoon, just as she was struggling to focus in class, her phone buzzed against her desk. A wave of unease washed over her. What could he have to say that would change everything? After school, Rachel rushed to the barn, her pulse racing with anticipation. Climbing the ladder, she found Jim standing near the window, staring out into the fading light. His expression was serious, an intensity she hadn't seen before. She called, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned, the concern etched on his face deepening. "I've been hearing things, Rachel, about the fighting." Her heart sank. "I overheard a couple of your neighbors talking. They're worried about you, about your parents. They said things have become." A chill crept down her spine. "They said there's been yelling and they've seen your father leave late at night." The air grew thick as she processed his words. Pain lanced through her heart like a shard of glass. "Of course I'm safe." Hoped her voice sounded strong enough, but the certainty slipped away as doubt crept in. "Rachel," Jim said softly, stepping closer, "this is more than just arguments." Tears streamed down her cheeks as the dam she had built against her emotions began to crack. "I thought I could ignore it, that I could pretend everything was fine." Jim placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to face this alone. You have me, and there are people in your life who want to help, but you need to speak up." As he spoke, the heartache within her felt interwoven with courage. The struggles at home could no longer be an endless loop of silent suffering. Change couldn't happen until she shattered the silence. But before Rachel could voice her thoughts, a loud crash suddenly rang outside, reverberating through the stillness of the barn. The sound made her jump, and she turned to Jim, alarm in her eyes. Jim's brow furrowed, his instincts kicking in. He moved toward the barn doors but paused, glancing back at her. "No matter what, don't leave." A swell of fear rose as she watched him disappear through the doors. Heart racing, her mind raced with possibilities. She had seen the darkness growing at home, but the thought of danger outside the barn opened up a terrifying new chapter she hadn't anticipated. Time crawled by as Rachel's anxiety twisted like a coil inside her. The shadows of uncertainty danced in the corners of the barn, and her heart hammered against her chest as she fought the urge to leave her sanctuary. What if something had happened to him? Minutes felt like hours, and just when she thought she couldn't wait any longer, Jim burst back into the barn, his face pale, eyes wide. "Go," she asked, panic rising. "There were cops out there. They're looking for someone close to you," Jim explained, his voice breaking slightly. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" "Your father," he said quietly, the weight of every word hanging heavy in the air. A wave of dread crashed over her, panic consuming her. "I don't know, but whatever is happening, it's serious. You can't stay here. We need to leave," he insisted, urgency creeping into his tone. Rachel's mind raced. She had spent so long hiding from her problems, but now they were standing at her doorstep as monsters hungry for attention. She felt the threads of her world unraveling, and all she wanted was to cling to the safety of the hayloft. But deep down, she knew she couldn't ignore the danger any longer. "Okay," she said, taking a shaky breath. As they moved cautiously through the barn and headed toward the door, the cold night air enveloped them. Rachel's heart pounded, her mind swirling with questions. What awaited them in the world outside? Would she truly have the strength to confront what lay ahead? As they stepped out of the barn, a bright flash illuminated the darkness, followed by the distant sound of sirens wailing in the night. Rachel felt each pulse of energy reverberating through her, right to her very core. This was it, the moment when everything changed. Jim urged as they darted into the shadows, adrenaline coursing through their veins, and her heart raced with uncertainty about what would come next. In that moment, whispered promises of hope intertwined with fear, and the path ahead drew closer. They wouldn't look back. They couldn't. Together, they faced a future fraught with uncertainty, where every step led deeper into the unknown. Would they find the answers Rachel desperately sought, or was this only the beginning of a much darker chapter?